Next, ladies and gentlemen, we bring to you another tale of one man's happy family. That of Father Knows Best, a much different story. No ghosts, no apparitions, no beer. Just a lot of coffee and wholesome fun and a laugh or two. So sit back and enjoy more of those good old days of radio.
Mother, is Maxwell House really the only coffee in the world?
Well, your father says so, and your father knows best.
Yes, it's Father Knows Best, transcribed in Hollywood and starring Robert Young as Father. A half-hour visit with your neighbors, the Andersons. Brought to you by America's favorite coffee, Maxwell House. The coffee that's always good to the last drop. Extensive research has proved conclusively that there are two kinds of husbands. One, the husband who takes absolutely no interest whatsoever in household affairs. And two, the husband whose wife wishes he'd mind his own business and leave things alone. In Springfield, in the white frame house on Maple Street, Jim Anderson is about to demonstrate that there is no happy medium. Like this.
6 goes into 36 6 times. 6 goes into 42 7 times.
Kathy, why don't you stop that? You know Mother has a headache.
But I have to learn my 6 goes and twosies.
Margaret, could I have another cup of coffee, please?
Of course, dear. Bud, stop banging your feet against the table.
I wasn't banging my feet, Mom. I was just... Holy cow, look at the time. I gotta go. Come on, Squirt.
Stop pulling me.
See you later, everybody.
Bud, don't slam the door.
Did you call me, Dad?
Never mind.
Okay.
Mother, why don't you lie down for a while? I'll take care of the dishes.
That's very sweet, Betty, but it isn't necessary.
All right, but I'll come right home in case you need me for anything.
All right, dear.
Goodbye, Dad.
Goodbye, Betty. Your head still aching, honey?
Oh, it's really nothing, Jim. I don't know why everyone makes such a fuss over a little headache. You'd think I were dying.
Margaret?
Yes, dear?
You know, you haven't been looking very well lately.
Well, that's a pleasant way to start the day. How to cheer up your wife in 6 easy lessons.
I don't mean you look that bad. I mean, you just look so tired.
Jim, dear, in 5 years I'll be 40. Then you can swap me in for 2 20s.
Margaret, I'm being very serious about this. If you want to treat it as a joke...
Oh, I'm sorry, dear. I'll try to be more respectful.
Good. Now, where was I?
You were telling me that I look like an old hag.
That's not what I said at all.
Oh, I'm sorry, a young hag.
Margaret, I am merely trying to be helpful. I think I know where you're tired. And I believe I have the answer to the whole problem.
You're going to shoot the children?
Well, that had occurred to me, but I think I have a better idea. What you need is a housekeeper.
Oh, Jim, don't be ridiculous.
Well, I don't see anything ridiculous about it at all. The Gilroys have a housekeeper, and I sell 3 times as much insurance as he does.
It's not a question of how much insurance you sell. We don't need a housekeeper. And where would she sleep? Or haven't you thought of that?
Of course I've thought of that. She can sleep in the den on the rollaway bed.
Jim, I don't want a housekeeper.
Then when people like the Edwards come over for dinner, there wouldn't be all the fuss and worry.
Jim.
Yes, dear?
Who are the Edwards?
Harry and Grace Edwards. You remember them, don't you? We met them at the Hathaways last week. He's the little stocky fellow with the red face, president of the Chamber of Commerce.
And they're coming to dinner when?
Tomorrow night. Didn't I tell you? I could have sworn.
Jim, is there any connection between the Edwards and this sudden passion for a housekeeper?
Well, of course not. I just thought, well, you know, you've been working so hard, and you have a headache.
There isn't any reason for wanting to impress Mr. Edwards, is there? Or perhaps Mrs. Edwards?
Well, Margaret, I just finished telling you the whole thing. Well, after all, Edwards is the head of the Chamber of Commerce, and there's an opening on the board.
And Bert Gilroy's trying to get it.
Well, the Edwards had dinner with the Gilroys.
And the Gilroys have a housekeeper, so you thought if we blossom forth with a housekeeper...
Margaret, being on the Chamber of Commerce would be a very great honor. I certainly think it's worth a small expenditure of time and energy.
Jim,
Yes, Margaret.
no housekeeper.
Well, if you'd only listen to me rather than flying off the handle.
I'm not flying off the handle. I'm merely telling you simply, quietly, and without emotion, no housekeeper.
There was an ad in the paper only last night.
No
All she
housekeeper.
wanted was $75 for the month, and she'll take complete
no
charge.
No housekeeper.
She's courteous, efficient, energetic, loyal.
No.
Wonderful cook. Neat as a pin, loves children. Margaret, why don't you give her a trial?
No.
Honey, this isn't something you can decide on the spur of the moment. Why don't you think it over?
All right. I can't see any harm in that.
Good. Well, I've got to go now. I'll call you right after lunch.
All right, dear. Oh, Jim,
Yes?
I've thought it over.
Margaret?
No housekeeper. Is that you, Jim?
Yes, dear. I'm home. Just put your things down there for a minute, Mrs. Collins.
Okay, nice looking place, ain't it?
It's, comfortable.
The children are all upstairs, and as soon as you're ready, we'll have. Hello.
Hiya.
Margaret, this is Mrs. Collins.
Oh, how do you do?
Well, to tell you the truth, I ain't doing so good. My feet are killing me, and I got a pain in my back that I wouldn't wish on my first husband.
I see. Jim, will you come out into the kitchen with me for a moment? I'd like to speak to you.
Hey, you got a piano. Ah, that's nice. I always like a house where they got a piano. Shows culture. And if there's one thing I'm just nuts about, it's culture.
Well, just make yourself at home, Mrs. Collins. We'll only be a minute.
Oh, that's okay. You don't have to worry about me. I got plenty of time.
Jim Anderson.
Now, wait a minute, Margaret. I can explain the whole thing.
I don't want an explanation, and I don't want a housekeeper. I told you that this morning.
But, honey, I hired her last night. I thought you'd be very happy.
Oh, I am. I'm the happiest woman in the whole world. And I want you to get that person out of my house.
Oh, Angel, it isn't worth quarreling about. Nothing is.
I know, Jim, but our home's too small for a housekeeper. We don't need one.
Now, Margaret, Mrs. Collins can be a great help. Don't you see, Margaret? She's a diamond in the rough. Mrs. Collins is very competent. Why, in 1 year, she worked for 9 of the best families in Springfield.
Only 9? She certainly gets around, doesn't she?
Well, they just didn't understand her. With a little training, she can be one of the best housekeepers in the whole town. She said so herself.
Jim, if we ever take a trip to New York, will you promise me one thing?
What's that?
Don't pay more than $50 for the Brooklyn Bridge.
Hey, ain't you two finished talking yet? It's getting late and I gotta get dinner rolling.
Mrs. Collins, I've been talking to my husband.
Why don't you talk to him in the parlor? It's becoming dinner time and I got work to do. Hey, some kitchen.
Jim?
Well, all right, Margaret. Mrs. Collins, I'm awfully sorry, but we've decided that, after all, you really won't be comfortable sleeping in the den.
Stop worrying about it, will you? I got it all figured out. We can move, what's your boy's name?
You mean Bud?
Yeah, Bud. We can switch him into the den. I move into his room and everybody's happy.
Well, it's not quite that simple, Mrs. Collins. I told my husband this morning
Hey,
that...
wait a minute. When have you been eating breakfast?
Well, at 8 o'clock, but it really isn't going to make any difference because...
Well, from now on, breakfast is going to be at 7 o'clock.
Now, see here, Mrs. Collins.
Wait, Jim, this is becoming very interesting. What else, Mrs. Collins?
Well, I ain't nobody's personal maid, so everybody hangs up his own stuff. And if I find any pants hanging on the back of a chair, don't be surprised if I just chuck them out the window.
Well, don't look at me, Margaret. I don't leave my pants on chairs.
No? Go ahead, Mrs. Collins. I think I'm beginning to like this whole idea.
Well, I don't mind if you invite folks for dinner. Matter of fact, I like company. But I gotta have 48 hours notice.
That seems logical.
Wait a minute. What if that's impossible? What if somebody comes in from out of town?
Take him to a restaurant. There's lots of restaurants in Springfield.
Margaret, if you think I'm going to stand here and be...
Jim, please. Mrs. Collins was talking.
Oh, that's okay. I finished anyway. Now, why don't you two kids just go inside and relax? And I'll start fixing up the grub.
All right, Mrs. Collins. Come on, kid.
Margaret, this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. If you think I'm going to...
Jim, you heard Mrs. Collins. We gotta go inside and relax.
That's right. Take it easy. I got everything under control.
Come on, Jim. Mrs. Collins has work to do.
Margaret, that woman's impossible.
Oh, I don't think so, dear. She's a, diamond in the rough, remember?
Yeah, but how rough can you get? She wasn't anything like that when I talked to her last night.
Well, we'll try it for a while. That's what you want, isn't it?
Margaret, I'm going into the kitchen and fire her right now.
Why, Jim, that wouldn't be fair. She's worked for 9 of the finest families in Springfield. And with the Edwards coming to dinner...
Oh, she can't be around them.
Wasn't that the general idea? We've got to, impress the Edwards. Unless I'm very much mistaken, they'll be impressed, all right.
Oh, Margaret, everybody...
Hey, Jim!
Jim?
Get the kids down. Soup's on.
Well, that was quite an about-face for Mother Anderson. If only Father would have talked to her first, there wouldn't have been any argument. And the way things are going, it doesn't look like she'll brook any arguments from Father. And I don't think I'll run into any argument on this point. I say, when you buy coffee, just one thing means real value. It's flavor. The flavor you get for your money. And extra flavor is what you get in our Maxwell House coffee. That wonderful, good to the last drop flavor no other coffee has to offer. No coffee but Maxwell House. And here's why that's so. It's our recipe. The only recipe under the sun for that good to the last drop flavor. It calls for certain fine varieties of coffee blended together in a very particular way. It's the only way, the only recipe for that famous Maxwell House flavor. That extra flavor that made our coffee America's favorite brand. So today, when you really want the most flavor for every penny you spend, Maxwell House is now more than ever your coffee buy. Just open up that familiar blue tin of Maxwell House tomorrow. See how much enjoyment, how much real value you get from the coffee that's always good to the last drop. A day has passed, as days have a habit of doing. And once again, it's dinner time in the White House on Maple Street. This time, however, it's a special dinner with company. The children are stashed away in the breakfast nook, and a uniformed housekeeper is there to wait on the table. Mr. Edwards, president of the Springfield Chamber of Commerce, says,
in the last 4 years, Anderson, bank clearances in the greater Springfield area has increased a total amount of 9.2%, and that's progress.
To which Jim Anderson replied,
Well, it certainly is, Mr. Edwards. That's progress if I've ever heard it.
At which point, the new housekeeper, Mrs. Collins, observed,
Now, why don't you two stop gabbing and eat your soup?
Mrs. Collins, I think I smell something burning in the kitchen.
It's your imagination, dearie. Everything's all cooked. Say, Jim,
Yes, Mrs. Collins?
if it's all right, could I take off this funny-looking cap? I don't mind the uniform, but the cap's driving me nuts.
Mrs. Collins, why don't you wait in the kitchen until we call you?
I can't hear anything in the kitchen. What you gonna do, talk about me? Go ahead, I don't mind.
I think you'd better go into the kitchen.
Okay, if that's the way you want it. You finished, Mrs. Edwards?
Yes, thank you.
Look, dearie, if I was you, I'd lay off the bread. With a shape like yours, it's murder.
Well, really?
Mrs. Collins, will you please go into the kitchen?
Okay, I can take a hint. Yell if you want me.
I'm so sorry, Mr. Edwards. You were saying something about progress.
I was? Oh, yes, I was, wasn't I? I think the Chamber of Commerce feels that its contribution to the progress of Greater Springfield...
Never mind, I'll get it.
Keep right on, Mr. Edwards. It's very interesting.
What is?
Well, whatever you were going to say.
Hello? Oh, hello, Bessie. Go ahead, folks, it's for me. What's cooking, Bess? Oh, yeah? Gee, I didn't know that.
Hasn't the weather been beautiful, Mrs. Edwards?
That's funny.
I haven't really noticed.
Oh, I
When
didn't
you're
know
as
that.
busy as I
Yeah, got
am,
a
you
real
know,
nice job now.
work,
Oh,
charities.
it's just wonderful.
Yes, indeed.
Love it here.
Grace manages to keep herself pretty busy.
Oh, yeah, okay.
It's getting so I have to
Okay, I
make
gotta go
an
now.
appointment to see her myself.
So, goodbye now.
You don't have any children, do you, Mr. Edwards?
No, I'm sorry to say, Mrs. Edwards and I have never been blessed.
That was my cousin Bessie on the phone. She's just a scream.
Oh, I'm sure she must be, Mrs. Collins, and I believe we're ready for the next course.
You know, she was just telling me that...
Mrs. Collins, we're ready for the next course.
Okay, I heard ya.
Mother, when I finish my dessert, may I go over?
Kathy, you get back inside where you belong. Can't you see we got company?
Yes, ma'am.
That's the trouble with kids nowadays. They don't know their place. Shove your plate over, will you, Jim?
Well, I'll answer it, Mrs. Collins.
No, you stay right where you are. What do you think you're paying me for?
That's a reasonable question, isn't it, Jim?
Okay, I'm coming. Hello?
Yes, indeed. You get a couple kids in the house and you're...
Oh, hello, Mickey.
Yes, indeed.
I did, huh? What did it pay? $15.40? Hey, that's all right. Now listen, put $5 down on Little Jeff in the Fourth at Bay Meadows. Yeah, $5, twin. Okay, Mickey, I'll give you a growl tomorrow.
Well, Mrs. Collins has an endless assortment of talent, hasn't she, Jim?
All right, Margaret, you don't have to rub it in.
Just a little gem my husband brought home for polishing.
Mrs. Anderson, I'm afraid that we...
That's all right, ain't it? $15.40 for two. Boy, I sure can pick 'em, can't I? Any of you kids play the horses?
Harry, I have an awful headache.
I know, dear. The way I feel, a headache would be a relief.
Mrs. Collins, if nothing more important comes up in the next 5 minutes, could we please have some food?
Sure, but take it from me, you're skipping a good thing if you miss Little Jeff in the Fourth tomorrow.
Mrs. Collins, if you don't hurry up, we'll be ready to eat Little Jeff tonight.
Good one, Jim. Okay, the roast beef's coming up.
Good night, Mrs. Anderson. It was a lovely evening, one I'll never forget.
Oh, I'm sure of that.
Good night, Anderson and Mrs. Anderson. It was well, good night.
Good night.
Good night, sir. We'll have to get together again real soon.
Yes, indeed. Yes, sometime soon. Good night.
Quiet, isn't it?
You know, Margaret, I don't know what to say. I was wrong. And I'm sorry. I think that woman's insane.
No, dear. She's just, well, uninhibited. She likes to speak her mind.
What mind? She's got the brain of a half-witted hyena. And if she had the least bit of decency, she'd give it back.
Jim.
What?
Did you see the look on Mrs. Edwards' face when Collins told her she needed a new girdle?
Oh, that was nothing. You should have seen Edwards when she told him he could use one, too.
Jim, I can't help it. I think they're two of the stuffiest people I've ever
She
met.
told Edwards, she said she...
Well, everybody's having a good time, huh? That's what I like. People laughing, enjoying themselves. You live longer that way.
Mrs. Collins, I'd like to speak to you if I may.
Talks nice, don't he? Go ahead, kid.
Thank you. Mrs. Collins, I'm not usually one to complain, but...
Complain? Well, go right ahead. If you feel you got a beef coming, just spread it right out. That's the way it ought to be. Everything out in the open. All the cards right there on the table.
Right. Now, Mrs. Collins...
No. I don't go for the stabbing in the back routine. You got any complaints? I want to hear them. It's your house. I'm working for you. And anything you don't like, all you got to do is just tell me.
How?
Jim, you'll wake the children.
You don't have to yell at me. Just talk. I'll listen.
Mrs. Collins, there are a great many things I could say, and a great many ways in which I could say them. But since all of the things I have to say and all of the ways in which I would say them add up to one and the self-same thing, I say to you now, from the very bottom of my heart, you are fired!
Jim, you know, in my whole life, that's the nicest way I ever got canned. Well, I gotta go to bed.
Just a moment, Mrs. Collins. I'm afraid you don't understand. My husband fired you. You don't work here anymore.
I know. I ain't deef, but I still gotta sleep.
Well, you will not sleep here, Mrs. Collins. We want you to go away. Now. You're discharged. You're the most discharged person we have ever had in this house. Now, will you please pack up your things and get out?
Jim boy, I'm surprised at you. A smart man like you with a nice home and a nice family, you ought to know more about the law. You can't fire me. I gotta have a week's notice.
Well, I'm giving you a week's notice. I'll pay your wages for a whole week. Only please, go away.
But I like it here. It ain't just the wages, Jim. I'm supposed to get room and board.
I'll give you 2 weeks' wages.
I don't think so. You got a piano, and I can call my bookie on the phone, and it's like a vacation with pay.
Margaret!
Mrs. Collins, is there anything I can do to,
Sure. Call me when breakfast is ready. Well, good night. I'll see you all in the morning.
Margaret.
Yes, dear?
When they start giving out awards to the world's prized idiot, be sure and tell them about me.
Oh, Jim, darling, you are an idiot, but you'd never take any prize.
Oh, I certainly would.
Well, I won't argue, dear. After all, Father knows best.
Well, Father certainly plunged into that head over heels. Now, how sorry he is. It just goes to show it always pays to look before you leap. On that score, when it comes to buying a pound of coffee, it certainly pays to look for flavor. The most in flavor for every penny you spend. After all, flavor is what you're paying for. And we don't think you can beat the famous flavor we pack into every pound of Maxwell House. But here's my point. Air can steal coffee flavor, and ordinary containers like paper bags can't prevent roasted coffee from losing flavor, whether it's ground or whole bean. That's why we take our Maxwell House fresh and flavorful from the roasting oven and carefully vacuum pack it in the familiar blue tin. It's the only way you're guaranteed coffee that's fresh and full flavored, as the hour it was roasted. So be sure, get all the flavor and fragrance you pay for. Your money's worth and more. You always will with Maxwell House coffee. Always. Good to the last drop. This world is not so bad a world as some would like to make it. But whether good or whether bad depends on how we take it. A week's gone by, and we find Jim Anderson walking down a busy street in Springfield. The Chamber of Commerce is still dear to his heart, and he is not what you would call a particularly happy man. Like this.
Serves me right, that's what it does. Make a fool of myself in front of Edwards. Spoil my chances of getting on the board. Gosh, I wanted that spot on the Chamber of Commerce. The speeches I could have made. About important things, too. Why, I could have said things like, ladies and gentlemen, It's an established fact that everybody wants a different thing. A farm or a store, a college education for their children, or maybe they just want to retire and go fishing. But there's one thing everybody wants: security. And there's one way, one sure way for each and every one of us to get it. Save for your independence. Buy United States savings bonds. That's what I could have told him. I could have said buy bonds automatically if you can on the payroll savings plan, or the bond-a-month plan at your bank. They're like cash on hand. They return you $4 for every 3 you invest. Buy United States savings bonds. Save for your independence and start now. Then I could have said,
I say, Anderson.
oh, well, hello, Mr. Edwards. I didn't see you.
I thought if you weren't in any great hurry, we might take a stroll together. A little matter has come up that I'd like to discuss with you.
Why, of course, Mr. Edwards. It would be a very great pleasure.
You know, Anderson, we never did get down to the discussion of business at your house the other night.
Oh, Mr. Edwards, I wanted to explain to you about that. You see, we ended up...
Tut, my boy. No need to explain. I understand completely. As you know, Anderson, there's a vacancy on the board of Chamber of Commerce, and, well, it's yours if you want it.
If I want it? Mr. Edwards, of course I want it, and thank you very much.
Oh, it's nothing, nothing at all. Tell me, Anderson, that Mrs. Collins, is she still with you?
Oh, no. We finally got rid of her this morning.
That's too bad.
I don't think we could have taken it another day. She had the whole family waiting on her hand and foot all week.
I see. You wouldn't know how I could get in touch with her, do you?
Well, I might. I think she left a forwarding address with Margaret. But why?
Well, I wouldn't want this to get around, Anderson.
Well, of course not, and I won't say a word.
I followed that bit of advice Mrs. Collins gave me about little Jeff, you know, and I won $64.
Did you know that now there's an instant coffee with fresh roast pure coffee flavor? It's Instant Maxwell House, the instant coffee with the famous flavor, the happiest combination in coffee. Wonderful, good to the last drop flavor combined with the convenience and thrift of coffee made instantly in the cup. Unlike most instant coffees, it's all rich, pure coffee, nothing added. Tomorrow, try the instant coffee with the famous flavor, Instant Maxwell House. Instantly good to the last drop. Our cast tonight for Father Knows Best was Judy Marsh as Margaret Anderson and Rob Humph as the father with all the answers, Jim Anderson. The rest of their family consisted of Nell Brennan as Kathy, Donna Andersmeyer as Betty, and Dexter Allendorfer as the ever-so-typical teenage son, Bud Anderson. Guests invited to dinner were the Edwards, John Shefke and Sue Gedzinski, with Ellie Babka playing Mrs. Collins, the epitome of gracious mannerism and household servitude.
Hey, you know, I just remembered Thursday's Thanksgiving, and I ain't got anything to do.
Down,
so
Ellie,
if anybody
down,
of
Ellie.
you want a little class, I can be there. I ain't so much on cooking, but I can serve, I can do all, and you gotta have a piano though.
Our music department was none other than Dr. John P. Gelsomino and sound effects provided by Helly Humph. We also are grateful to our technical staff, John V. Gelsomino and Ed Zaja, and of course, to the Riverside Township Supervisor, Richard Tuxter, and the Board of Trustees for their continuing support. Those of you having access to Network 6 local cable programming We're on every evening at 6 p.m. My name is Andre Dixon, and now, one more very important announcement before we close our show.
Well, please join us next month for our annual Christmas show that John was talking about before, the Christmas Carol. The day will be Sunday, December 21st at 2 in the afternoon right here in the beautiful Riverside Township Auditorium. A full professional orchestra will add to the festivities and entertain with a wonderful holiday concert following the play. We hear that St. Nick himself has already signed up to make an appearance. Remember to tell your friends and neighbors so that we may bring this joyous occasion to many. For now, thank you for being such a wonderful audience. Please know that we were the radio players as well as the entire Riverside Township Board wish you all a very happy Thanksgiving. Don't burn your turkey. And hopes you will be able to spend it with someone near and dear. Good night, and drive home safely, won't you?
This is NBC, the National Broadcasting Company.
We really hope you enjoyed our show tonight, and I do hope that you will come on December 21st to our Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens and our Christmas concert, which will feature music that you probably haven't heard in a long time. If you can remember the actor Errol Flynn, Claude Rains, Basil Rathbone, in that magnificent motion picture, The Adventures of Robin Hood. I was able to get the complete score, the musical score that they used for Robin Hood, and condensed it down. So we will have the music from that magnificent motion picture by Eric Wolfgang Korngold, The Adventures of Robin Hood, along with all our Christmas tunes and our wonderful overtures. The orchestra is comprised of members of the Lyric Opera Orchestra and the Chicago Symphony. So you will have a wonderful concert, and Santa Claus will be here to provide for all boys and girls and all boys and girls young at heart something for Christmas. And then we'll also have Father Christmas in the English tradition of Charles Dickens ring in the Christmas season in this year of 2008. So we hope that you can make it. Bring some friends, neighbors, grandchildren, bring everyone you can. It'll be a wonderful festive day. It'll be a traditional Christmas program. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and from all of us to all of you, God bless you all, and good night.